In recent years, women in the Bible and consequently women's roles in the church has become a topic of much tension and debate within the Christian church. It feels like, in my opinion, in just the past 5 years, this topic has become a point of really heated debate within a lot of churches and in society, honestly. I mention this because this week I'm going to talk about the only female judge in the Wild West of the Bible. That judge is Deborah, or as I like to call her, the Queen Bee. And just to clarify, she wasn't actually a queen in Israel, it's just a little moniker I like to give her. Contrary to what most people may think, this story about Deborah is not primarily addressing women's roles in ancient Near Eastern society. Rather, I believe that it is a story about identity, shame, and redemption. It is about the tension between the seed of the woman and the seed of the snake. It's about how God can redeem the most unlikely and irretrievable of people. So I hope you enjoy this conversation about bees, lightning, snakes, and tent pegs. Here we go. Before I begin, just a little side note. My first 2 episodes I had I had just a water bottle. I got some tea and some sparkling water now, so I'll probably be sipping that throughout this conversation so my mouth doesn't dry out. So just a little forewarning before we get started. So we're going to start and just read from Judges to start off our story and introduce our characters, because there's more than just Deborah in this story. So we'll start in Judges 4, verse 1. Then the sons of Israel did evil in the sight of Yahweh after Ehud died. So Yahweh sold them into the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. And the commander of his army was Sisera, who lived in Harosheth Hagoyim. The sons of Israel cried out to Yahweh, for he had 900 iron chariots, and he oppressed the sons of Israel severely for 20 years. Now Deborah, a prophet woman, the wife of Lapidoth, was judging Israel at that time. She used to sit under the palm tree of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim. And the sons of Israel went up to her for judgment. Now she sent word and summoned Barak the son of Abinoam from Kadesh, Naphtali, and said to him, Yahweh the God of Israel has indeed commanded, go and march to Mount Tabor, and take with you 10,000 men from the sons of Naphtali and from the sons of Zebulun. I will draw out Sisera to you, the commander of Jabin's armies with his chariots and his many troops to the Kishon River, and I will hand him over to you. Then Barak said to her, if you will go with me, then I will go, but if you will not go with me, I won't go. She said, I will certainly go with you. However, the fame shall not be yours on the journey that you are about to take, for Yahweh will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman. Then Deborah got up and went with Barak to Kadesh. Barak summoned Zebulun and Naphtali to Kadesh, and 10,000 men went up at his feet, and Deborah also went up with him. Okay. So I'd like to start off our time talking about the main characters here and introducing the main characters of our story, because they're going to be important for the rest of our time. So first, there's Deborah, the Queen Bee. Again, not a queen, just a judge for Israel. I would like to point out that there is a good argument to be made that she is not the primary shofet in this story. I think it might be better to say that Deborah was she was the judge, not the sheriff in town here. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that. I say this because, first of all, Barak and not Deborah is the judge referenced from the story in later biblical accounts. So this story about Deborah and Barak is referenced very briefly 2 times later on in the Bible. First, in 1 Samuel 12, Samuel gives a speech which recounts the judges who saved Israel. And in this speech, some translations include the name Barak along with Gideon, Yiftach, and Samuel, who are some of the judges and people that saved Israel. But curiously, the authors of Samuel leave out Deborah's name, even though she is said to be a judge here and clearly works side by side with Barak. So in addition to this, the author to the letter of Hebrews, also lists out a reference of Judges from this first book and mentions Barak also, but curiously leaves out Deborah as well. So when recounting the Judges, the author famously says, "What more shall I say? I do not have time to tell about Gideon, Barak, Samson, and Yiftach, about David and Samuel and the prophets." I find it interesting here that Barak, not Deborah, is mentioned in these two lists of the judges who saved Israel, because when you read the story, Barak almost seems to defer to Deborah. He doesn't want to go to battle unless this prophet woman comes with him. So there seems to be this discrepancy here between what the story presents to us as to who the judge was here and what later biblical accounts recount to us about this story. So which is it? Was Deborah or Barak the judge here? Maybe they were both a judge, but if that's the case, why omit Deborah? Well, we'll come back to this soon. I think I want to lay some more groundwork first in the characters in this story to explain that. So, let's talk a little bit more about Deborah. I call her the Queen Bee because her name means bee in Hebrew. So the palm tree of Deborah could also be called the palm of the bee. Also, Deborah is literally called a prophet woman. Now, there's a word in Hebrew for prophetess that is used multiple times in the Bible, and it's a very regular word, but the authors intentionally seem to avoid using the word prophetess here in place of prophet woman. And prophet woman sounds about as awkward in Hebrew as it does in English. So the authors seem to be intentionally highlighting the fact that Deborah is a woman here. And indeed, the theme of the woman, or the theme of the seed of the woman and the seed of the snake, is something that will continually pop up in this story. Some good tea. Okay, additionally, it's worth noting that Deborah is one of the only judges in this book who acts more like a judge and less like a sheriff. Let's remember from our first episode that the word shofet in Hebrew can denote both a charismatic leader and also a judicial office. I think that Deborah is said to be a judge in our English sense of the word, but I don't think that I would classify her as a sheriff, if that makes sense. Here, I think we're coming back to the first episode and my amateur translation of the word shofet. If we see this as the book of sheriffs, it's much easier to understand why later biblical authors would not include Deborah in their list of sheriffs and saviors during this time, because I believe that Deborah in this story is the prophet woman and the judge, while Barak is the savior and the sheriff. To me, this makes a lot more sense than trying to import our modern-day argument about women's roles into the story, which, by the way, was not an argument that was going on during the time of the writing of the Bible or these stories. In other words, it feels like to me the biblical authors, when referencing the sheriffs of Israel, were talking about the military saviors and not the judges who judged cases like a hammer and gavel, because that word shofet in Hebrew can have two different meanings, right? As a double meaning, someone who judges judicial cases and also a charismatic leader. Indeed, both in Samuel and the letter to the Hebrews, the authors are referencing people who delivered Israel from their enemies and saved God's people. That is a different function in my mind than serving God's people as a prophet woman and a judge. Okay, that was Deborah. What about Barak? Barak's name means something like lightning or lightning flash in Hebrew. His name is a synonym to another person's name who also meant lightning in our previous story, Lord Bezek. Right? Remember, Bezek in Hebrew also means lightning. Barak means something like lightning flash. It's also worth noting here that Barak's name in Hebrew sounds exactly like the Hebrew word which means to bless, which is also pronounced Barak. However, the only difference is that these two words are spelled differently. So Barak's name sounds like the Hebrew word Barak, which means to bless, right? Barak in Hebrew can, depending on how you spell it, can mean to bless or a lightning flash. So the Barak that means to bless is spelled with the Hebrew letter that is equivalent to a K in English, but the Barak that means lightning flash, that is our main character, his name here is spelled with the Hebrew letter equivalent of a Q in English. Is this a play on words or just a coincidence? I'm willing to admit here, I'm not really entirely sure. I did think it was worth, like, at least mentioning, though. And it's kind of curious that Barak's name can mean lightning flash. This word also, I believe, is used like one time in the Bible to denote like the flashing of a sword when it's unsheathed, right? It feels like this really military, powerful name, but it also can kind of sound like the Hebrew word to bless, right? To be blessed. It's also worth noting here that Deborah not only summons Barak, but she also tells him where to go fight Sisera and the Canaanites at Mount Tabor, and how many troops to take with him, even which tribes to take these troops from. I get the feeling here that Deborah is sort of encouraging Barak to do what she knows that he's capable of doing. It's almost like Deborah is both being a prophet woman and a wise judge. I think she's kind of like taking the role of coach and like counselor here. She's coaching and spurring on her sheriff, so to speak. I should also note that Mount Tabor is a really cool place. I'll try and add like an image here of Mount Tabor. If you're listening to this, I would encourage you just to Google Mount Tabor. If I'm not mistaken, some scholars believe that this place is the mountain where the transfiguration of Jesus takes place in the Gospels. I should also note that Barak is from Kadesh, Naphtali, or literally the holy place of Naphtali. Kadesh means holy in the Bible, in Hebrew, sorry. Holy places in the Bible are often on mountains, foothills, or high places. And Mount Tabor is within the borders of the tribe of Naphtali. So I think that this place that is called Kadesh Naphtali, where Barak is from, could be Mount Tabor or a place near Mount Tabor. There's a good possibility that Barak is already from the place where Deborah is telling him to gather his troops. Additionally, Deborah and God could be taking a page from Obi-Wan Kenobi. Not only is Mount Tabor a spiritually charged place and most likely on Barak's home turf, but it is also strategically advantageous against an army of chariots because it would give Israel the infamous high ground.
It's over, Anakin! I have the high ground!
Okay, so Barak has to be called to fight in this battle by the prophet woman. But even after he's called the first time, he's hesitant and he refuses to go to battle unless Deborah accompanies him. It's like Barak is thinking of Deborah as like a spiritual charm, like she would bring him some sort of natural or tactical advantage in battle. Interestingly, Deborah warns him that if she comes with them, the credit would be given to a woman. In the moment, this seems to be Deborah saying that she will get credit for the victory if she helps him strategize in the battlefield, right? Like if she's like riding out on the battle and she's this wise prophet woman and this judge, she's helping the battle plan, she's going to get the credit, right? In fact, the woman that will defeat Sisera is not Deborah, but a very different and unlikely woman who will show up later. Now would be a good time to mention the other two main players of the story, Yabin and Sisera. So Yabin is the king of Canaan, which is a weird title. This would be akin to calling someone today the king of Europe. I say this because Canaan was a land with a collection of people groups, tribes, and nations, not like a unified nation like the United States. If Yabin was the most powerful king of Canaan, then this would make him like a super king, and his army would most likely be a collection of all the inhabitants of the land of Canaan. Finally, there's Sisera. He is the military general for Yabin. His name very fittingly means something like battle array or battlefield, which sounds like a transformer or a Decepticon, right? Like battle array, right? Like it just has like a nice ring to it. Sisera has 900 iron chariots. This would be equivalent to something like having 900 tanks today. So Sisera has vastly superior weapons to Barak. If we were to modernize this, then this would be akin to Barak having some soldiers, some rifles, maybe some machine guns, and Sisera having a full-fledged army with a bunch of tanks. I guess we can have a bit of sympathy for Barak here, but what he lacks in his military strength, he makes up in his spiritual and strategic advantage and the infamous high ground. One more thing to note here, and that's that each side has their respective leader commanding and supervising their military general. In other words, both sides have some sort of political or civil leader with a military commander to go out and lead each side's armies. So Deborah plays the role of prophetess, coach, spiritual advisor, and supporter for Barak, who's leading Israel's armies, where Yabin plays the role of monarch and ruler, who also oversees Sisera, the commander of Canaan's armies. It feels like these characters parallel each other. Deborah and Yabin, the commanders and advisors, and Barak and Sisera, the military, like actual military commanders over the troops. So we have our characters, we have our armies, the battlefield is set. Let's keep going in the story. Okay, Judges 4, verse 11. Now, Heber the Canaanite had separated himself from the Canaanites, that is, from the sons of Hovav, the father-in-law of Moses, and he pitched his tent as far away as the oak of Zaananim, which is near Kadesh. Then they told Sisera that Barak, the son of Abinoam, had gone up to Mount Tabor. Sisera summoned all his chariots, 900 iron chariots, and all the people who were with him, from Harosheth Hagoyim to the river Kishon. Then Deborah said to Barak, "Arise, for this is the day on which Yahweh has handed Sisera over to you. Behold, Yahweh has gone out before you." So Barak went down from Mount Tabor with 10,000 men following him, and Yahweh confused Sisera and all his chariots and all his army with the edge of the sword before Barak. And Sisera got down from his chariot and fled on foot, but Barak pursued the chariots and the army as far as Harosheth Hagoyim, and all the army of Sisera fell by the edge of the sword. Not even one was left. Okay, now we have some new characters emerging in the story. The authors take some time to pause just before the battle to introduce this weird guy named Heber, and this guy is a Canaanite, that is a descendant of Cain. We've seen these guys before, and not only is he a descendant of Cain, he also comes from the father-in-law of Moses, a guy named Hovav. So now if you remember, we talked in an earlier episode about these Canaanites, back in chapter 1 of Judges. These guys were living with Othniel's clan in Judah. Here, we are told that Heber, this guy, has separated himself from the rest of the Canaanites and has pitched his tent at the oak of Zaananim. This place evidently was near Kadesh. Presumably, Kadesh was like Kadesh Naphtali, right? So he's presumably pitching a tent near this oak tree near Mount Tabor, and he's right next to the battle. Why bring up this guy named Hovav? Who is this guy? Why bring up this guy Heber and his relative Hovav? Kind of a unfortunate, like they sound pretty similar, right? I thought Moses' father-in-law was Jethro, not Hovav, right? So this guy Heber comes into this conversation. He's a descendant of Cain and also from Moses' father-in-law, but then they say that Moses' father-in-law was Hovav when his father-in-law was actually Jethro. So Heber, let's start with Heber. He has an interesting name in Hebrew. Heber in Hebrew can mean both friendship, but it also has a homonym, a word that is spelled exactly the same way, that can denote witchcraft. So Heber's name can denote both a friend or the practice of witchcraft. His name, just like his family identity, can denote an ally or an evil practice. His name has built within it like these two different conflicting lineages that his family is made up of. I think it's really fitting. It seems like whenever we find him in the story, he's physically moving away from his family to be closer to the people of God. He's actively separating himself from the Canaanites. This should be a good thing, right? Okay, so that's Heber. Now, who is this guy, Hovav, that he's descended from, who's called Moses' father-in-law? Well, if you look up Hovav in the Bible, you'll see that Hovav actually is from the family of Jethro. He is the brother-in-law of Moses, not the father-in-law, though. So Hovav is a son of Jethro. Moses married Jethro's daughter, Zipporah, and Hobab was Zipporah's sister. So the authors could have said that Heber was getting away from the family of Jethro, the father-in-law of Moses, but instead they choose here to emphasize that this was the family of a less prominent guy named Hobab. So why bring up Hobab? Why emphasize Hobab? What's so special about this guy? Well, Hobab does come up once in Moses' story, specifically in Numbers chapter 10, verse 29 through 32. I like to read from that passage because it gives us some really interesting, intriguing content and information about Hobab. This is what it says. Then Moses said to Hobab, the son of Reuel is another name for Jethro, the Midianite, Moses' father-in-law, we are setting out to the place which Yahweh said, I will give it to you. Come with us, and we will do you good, for Yahweh has promised good concerning Israel. But he said to him, I will not come, but rather will go to my own country and my own relatives. Then he said, please do not leave us, since you know where we should camp in the wilderness. You will be as eyes for us. So it will be, if you go with us, that whatever Yahweh does for us, we will do for you. So they moved on from the mountain of Yahweh 3 days' journey. Okay, so Hobab is said to be the son of Reuel, which I mentioned is another name for Jethro. I know there's a lot of names here. I'm sorry, there's a lot going on, but let's try to stick with me, and this will start to make sense. So Moses is trying to recruit his brother-in-law Hobab to go with him into the promised land. But then Hobab tells Moses no. Moses prods him and says that Hobab knows where the Israelites should camp in the wilderness. Now that is interesting. I thought that Yahweh would lead the Israelites via a cloud of smoke and a pillar of fire. Somehow, Hobab is like a spiritual and physical guide for the Israelites in the wilderness, which is probably why Moses is recruiting him. Now, we are not told if Hobab goes to Israel at all. We're not given an answer from Hobab. He doesn't respond to Moses the second time. Then Israel just leaves Sinai after this, and that's all we're really told about this Hobab guy. It is as if you, the reader, are wondering if Moses' in-laws make the decision to live with him or not. It feels like you're supposed to read the story as not being resolved. That is, until you get to the book of Judges here, where you might remember back in chapter 1, these people who are descended somehow from Cain leave Jericho and live with the tribe of Judah. And then they come up again here in this story, and Hobab's people finally leave. Heber finally leaves the people of Hobab, and he lives near another holy mountain, near Mount Tabor. So Hobab was near Mount Sinai when this decision was being posed to him. Heber is near Mount Tabor, another holy mountain. It's also the fact that we were told here that Hobab's descendant Heber chooses to live with the Israelites implies that Hobab may have declined Moses' invitation in Numbers, but now his descendant Heber seems to be taking up Moses on his offer. Now would be a good time to talk about the name of this oak that Heber pitches his tent next to, the oak of Zaananim. Zaananim means nomads, so Heber pitches his tent near the oak of nomads. This is really interesting to me because it's very reminiscent of another nomad who often pitched his tent near oaks in holy places in the Bible, Abraham. It feels like Heber is sort of taking on the role of Abraham here. He is a nomad in the Promised Land. He is called out of his worldly family by God. Well, maybe not by God. He's just called out of his worldly family. And Abraham, late in his life, is also called out of Ur of the Chaldeans. And if you didn't know, Chaldea is another name for Babylon. So both these guys are living amongst some questionable people groups, and then they separate themselves from those people groups and live near oaks as wanderers, right, as nomads. Kind of interesting. I think Heber is a descendant from this family who was both from Cain and from Jethro. But instead of the authors emphasizing Jethro's line here, they somehow, or for some reason, choose to emphasize a lesser-known character from Jethro's family, a guy named Hobab. And Hobab is really only pictured once before this in that story we talked about. And he's this guide for Israel, and he's like offered by Moses to come live with Israel. But instead of getting an answer for him, we just curiously given no response and no resolution at all to that story. Now we see some resolution starting to take place. Heber has chosen to separate himself from the family of Hobab, from the line of Cain, and he has now pitched his tent in Israelite territory near a tree called the Oak of the Nomad, and he seems to be being called out of his old family line, living as a nomad, as a wanderer in the Promised Land. It's almost like he's finally taking up Moses' offer, so to speak, to live with the people of God. Oh, that was a lot. Now that we've introduced this Abrahamic character near the battle, let's jump back to the battle. Barak defeats the Canaanites handily, and our story picks up with Sisera, the Canaanite captain, fleeing alone on foot. Now Sisera fled on foot to the tent of Yael, the wife of Heber the Canaanite, because there was peace between Yabin and the king of Hazor and the house of Heber the Canaanite. And Yael went out to meet Sisera and said to him, "Turn aside, my master, turn aside to me, do not be afraid." So he turned aside to her into the tent, and she covered him with a blanket. And he said to her, "Please, give me a little bit of water to drink, for I'm thirsty." So she opened up a leather bottle of milk and gave him a drink. And she covered him and he said to her, "Stand in the doorway of the tent. And it shall be, if anyone comes and inquires of you and says, 'Is anyone there?' that you shall say, 'No.'" But Yael, Heber's wife, took a tent peg and a hammer in her hand and went secretly to him and drove the tent peg into his temple, and it went through the ground, for he was sound asleep and exhausted, so he died. And behold, while Barak was pursuing Sisera, Yael came out to meet him and said, "Come, and I will show you the man you are seeking." So he entered with her, and behold, Sisera was lying dead with a tent peg in his temple. First of all, I wanted to note how ironic it is that Sisera, whose name means battlefield, is fleeing the battlefield. I also want to note here that we were introduced to a new character, Heber's wife, Yael. Yael is really interesting and important character in the story. First, because she is the woman that Deborah prophesied about earlier, who would get the glory from this battle, because she is the one who puts the nail in the coffin, pun intended, and finishes off Sisera. More importantly, Yael's family is descended from Cain. If you remember our first episode on Judges, then you remember that Cain is literally portrayed as the seed of the snake in the Genesis narrative. So, in one sense, Yael is a seed of the line of the snake, right? She's a seed from Cain. But in another sense, she is a woman who is very motherly and womanlike in the way she carries herself. And in a very womanly and motherly fashion, she crushes the head of an enemy. I mean, think about all the deceptive details in this story. Sisera is fleeing the battlefield and looking for a place to hide. Then he hears a voice, "Turn over here, my master. Turn over here." Sisera looks over and sees what he thinks to be a friendly face, Yael. Isn't that Heber's wife? And here the author pauses to tell us, oh yeah, Heber and Yavin, they were on good terms. They were buddies. So we know Sisera is beginning to let his guard down. Then I believe we're to imagine Sisera running over to the tent, immediately peeping outside, inspecting the tent for any danger. I imagine Yael must have calmed him down, told him to lie down, threw a blanket over him, right? Asked him if he needed anything. Notice how in the text we were told that Sisera asks for water and she gives him milk. She's being really hospitable. As a side note here, there's a song after this battle we'll talk about called the Song of Deborah and Barak. In that song, Yael is said to have given Sisera some more milk. So in that story, Deborah is pictured as this loving mother giving her son some warm milk to help him fall asleep. Now Sisera's all cozied up in a blanket. He feels safe in his tent. He's got his warm milk. Yael then is said to cover him. I assume this means either like she hid him or she like tucked him in, right? But Sisera is still a bit anxious, so he tells Yael to watch the entrance. After a while, the general falls asleep, and Yael, in a very gruesome act, takes a tent peg, grabs a hammer, and hammers his head into the ground. I'm going through this whole sequence to show us both how motherly and Eve-like Yael is, but also how cunning, deceptive, and snake-like she is. Every move of hospitality and nurturing is one step closer for Sisera to fall into her trap. Yael, very paradoxically, shows which side she truly is on through motherly and snake-like deception. She is acting both like a mother, which makes one think of Eve, the first mother of the Bible, but in doing so, Yael also acts very shrewdly like a snake, which also makes one think of the snake in the garden who deceived Eve. So there's a few takeaways from all this. This is definitely a partial fulfillment of Genesis 3:15, where God curses the snake and declares that the seed of Eve, the seed of the woman, will crush this head of the seed of the snake. Yael here is crushing the head of an enemy of God's people. Interestingly, though, Yael acts like the seed of the snake, and it is through her deception that she proves herself to be the seed of the woman. Right? You would think it'd be like the opposite. You would think, well, how do you prove yourself to be like actually a part of God's people? Through being noble and honorable. Well, actually, Yael is a seed of from the line of Cain, and she acts really deceptive and shrewdly in order to get into the people of God. This shows me that righteous acts can at times involve deception. That's something to ponder about for a while, I think. Right? It also shows us how hard it is at times to tell if someone is showing their allegiance to the snake or to God. It's almost like we're all going to have certain moments which will test our allegiance to God and put our identities to the test. These are moments where we must choose under great pressure if we're going to embrace the family lineage of the snake or the lineage of the people of God. I take away from this story that you can change your story. You can change your identity. I think a lot of believers find themselves in the sandals of Heber and his wife and in the sandals of Hovav, forever considering where they are proverbially going to live, with one foot in God's tent and God's people and one foot in with Cain's tent and Cain's in the seed of the serpent. You don't have to bear the mark of shame forever. But when you choose to identify with God's people, your identity and allegiance will be put to the test, right? Like here, Heber separates himself from the people of Cain, and then his wife Yael is given this test, right? She oh wow, Sisera is the commander of the army that Heber, my husband, has been on good terms with. What should I do here? And she uses deception to show which side she's truly on. I think we're left in this story, to put ourselves in Yael and Heber's shoes. Which side will we choose? Which lineage will we choose to embrace? And that's not always like cut and dry in how it looks and how we go about doing that. That's the story of Deborah and Barak. Now, after this story, as I mentioned earlier, we were given this long song. I don't know if any of y'all do this, but a lot of times, I will read the Bible and envision it in the form of an anime or a movie. There's some parts of the Bible that would just make epic action scenes, right? Some that would be comedies, and still others that might be dramas. I think our last episode with Ehud might be a bit of an action comedy, right? But then there are some parts of the Bible that just seem to break out into song and feel more like a musical than a regular movie. I think that is what's going on here in Judges chapter 5. So in chapter 4, we have the story of Barak and Deborah. And then in chapter 5, we have a song that recounts the story of Barak and Deborah through a little bit of a comedic fashion, comedic form. So we're given this long song that redescribes the battle in poetic form on comedic fashion. I think the best example or parallel to this in a movie today would be the Indian movie RRR. If anyone has ever seen it, it is such an epic movie. I just watched it and wow, oh my gosh, such a great movie. It's this really over the top Indian action movie, and in this movie there are a few moments where the characters break out into song and dance. It actually ends with like a whole like music video. Most of Hollywood's movies today are either full of fully musicals or fully action musicals. Sorry, they're either fully musicals or fully action movies. We don't really have a category for action musicals, but I would like to put forth a new category of the action musical. I think that's the best way to describe RRR. That's also kind of the best way to describe Judges chapter 4 through 5, because there's actions and songs, and perhaps there was dancing, and when Deborah and Barak sang this song back in the day. While we're on this topic, there are quite a few times in the Bible when people break out into song like this. This is not like a singular moment. When Moses parts the Red Sea, his sister breaks out into song after they cross through. When Hannah, the mother of Samuel, finally gives birth to a son, she also breaks out into a song. There are multiple times in David's life, which, by the way, would also probably be an action musical, where we are given a few verses of a song or a tune. Here we're given a song that both Deborah and Barak sing together, and it gives a different comedic perspective on this battle. So I'd like to just read a few lines from the song, and then afterwards I wanted to share with y'all a poem that I've written that is based on the song that makes it rhyme a little bit more. Okay, so let's jump into the song of Deborah and Barak. Judges 5, starting verse 1. Then Deborah and Barak, the son of Abinoam, sang on that day, saying, when the princes in Israel took the lead, when the people answered the call, O bless Yahweh. Hear you kings, give ear, O chiefs. I myself to Yahweh, myself will sing. I will sing praise to Yahweh, the God of Israel. Yahweh, when you went out from Seir, when you marched from the field of Edom, the earth quaked, the heavens dripped, the clouds, they dripped water, the mountains melted before Yahweh, the one of Sinai, before Yahweh, the God of Israel. Okay, let's stop there. There's a few things to note. First of all, notice how Deborah and Barak are singing this song side by side. They're definitely seen as working together here yet again. It's also worth noting that this song starts out with a picture of Yahweh physically walking across nations to go into battle, right? It's like they anthropomorphize God. Specifically, Yahweh walks over Seir and Edom. Seir, or Seir, however you say it, and Edom are two names for the same place. Edom in the Bible is a place where the people group that descended from Esau live. Esau was the brother of Jacob. This country, Edom or Seir, is south of Israel. It borders Judah, actually. So this is Yahweh's walking from Seir and striding from the fields of Edom is both a geographical marker. He is coming from the south, and it is also a replaying of the Israelites coming up from Egypt in their wilderness wanderings, getting ready to go to war against their inhabitants of Canaan. So it's like Yahweh is coming up from the south to reconquer Israel's enemies in battle. Kind of cool. When Yahweh walks, the earth heaves, the heavens dripped, and the clouds also dripped. Even the mountains are said to melt before his presence. So Yahweh is like shown here shaking the earth, melting the mountains, bringing chaos and turbulent storms in the skies, in the heavens, on his way to the battle. It's like he's melting the whole cosmos as he's walking towards this battle. He is the one pictured as the warrior in the beginning of this poem, but later on, the people and the tribes who actually show up to the battle are the ones doing the fighting, right? Also, notice how the earth, the mountains, and the land, they sandwich this poetic flourish. So it goes earth, skies, clouds, mountains. Mountains are kind of a domain of the earth. They're part of the earth, and clouds are part of the sky, right? So this is essentially saying earth, sky, sky, earth. This structure makes it feel like the chaos, the melting, and the shaking, and the dripping, it's all encompassing. In other words, when Yahweh walks over to the battlefield, the whole cosmos is melting before him, just at his sight. Later on in the story, the people are the actual ones portrayed doing the fighting. Okay, Kind of cool, kind of an epic introduction into this battle. Let's keep going in the poem. Awake, awake, Deborah. Awake and speak a song. Arise, Barak, and lead away your captives, son of Abinoam. Then the remnant of the nobles came down. Yahweh's people came from amidst the warriors, from Ephraim, those whose root is in Amalek. After you, O Benjamin, with your peoples, from Machir, leaders came down, and from Zebulun, wielders of the baton, and the princes of Issachar were with Deborah. And Issachar, like Barak, in the valley they ran free among the divisions of Reuben. Great were the heart's probings. Why did you sit among the sheepfolds? To hear the piping of the flocks among the divisions of Reuben. Great were the heart's probings. Gilead dwelled across the Jordan. And why did Dan linger by the ships? Asher sat by the seashore and dwelled by its landings. Zebulun, however, were a people who challenged death, and Naphtali were on the heights of the field. Okay, this next section is about the tribes that did and did not show up to battle. This is like an ancient roast, like an ancient trash talk. Notice how there's a line that is repeated verbatim in this section. We see the line, among the divisions of Reuben, great were the heart's probings. That line is repeated twice, and it has one line in between that repetition. Anytime in the Bible you see lines or words or even themes that are repeated, that usually they are highlighting lines or words in between the repetition of those lines or words. Right? So anytime you see a repetition of a line or a word, the things in between that repetition are what's being highlighted. Here we see that the lines, why did you sit among the sheepfolds, is centered in between the lines about the musings of Reuben's heart. This has the effect of emphasizing the fact that Reuben was sitting at the sheepfolds. The implication then is that they should have been at the battle with their fellow countrymen. So why Reuben was just sitting amongst the sheepfolds, twiddling their thumbs, right? Like they're listening to some shepherd songs while the battle was going on. Additionally, it's worth noting here that while the heart in Hebrew was the seat of emotions, it was also the seat of intellect and thinking. So for Reuben to have some great hard probings of the heart was to say something of the effect that they were really thinking up some great reasons as to why they should not go to the battlefield. In other words, Reuben kept overthinking the battle. They kept overanalyzing everything and coming up with every reason as to why they should stay in their safe sheep fields. It's like an ancient roast of the tribe of Reuben. It's like the singers who are embodied as Barak and Deborah are dissing the tribe of Reuben and all the other tribes that didn't show up to fight. It's also worth noting here that it's not just Reuben that gets the roast, right? There are some other honorable mentions. Gilead, why didn't that region show up to the battle? Well, they lived across the Jordan. It was like a long trip for them. They didn't want to cross the Jordan River, right? Dan was a tribe that was located on the coast of Israel. They are said to linger by ships. In other words, ships were like a really great way of escaping, right? This would be akin to someone lingering by the airport today, or like sitting by their car with like their keys in hand. In other words, Dan was ready to flee the moment their fellow tribes started to lose. Asher, well, why didn't Asher show up? Asher was also a coastal tribe. Asher sold seashells by the seashore. In other words, they relaxed by the beach while their countrymen went to war. So that's some ancient trash talk and some praise from the tribes who did and didn't show up to the battle. Kind of cool, right? That's where the comedic element comes in. But there's some more comedic element, right? That's going to come in here, and we're going to keep going in the song. The hooves of the horses hammered from the gallop of his stallions. Curse Merah, said the angel of Yahweh, utterly curse its inhabitants, because they did not come to help Yahweh, to the help of Yahweh against the warriors. Blessed above all women is Yael, the wife of Heber the Canaanite. Above all the women in tents she is blessed. He asked for water, she gave him milk. In a magnificent bowl she brought him curds. She searched out her hand for the tent peg, and her right hand for the workman's hammer. Then she hammered Sisera, smashed his head. She shattered and pierced his temple. Between her feet he knelt. He fell. He lay. Between her feet he knelt. He fell. Where he knelt, There he fell dead. Here, there's some more repetition going on. First, notice how the word hammered is repeated. First with the hammering of the hooves of the horses which gallop out to fight Sisera. Or maybe they're the hammering of Sisera's horses, which I think would be more likely because he was the one with the 900 iron chariots in the battle, remember? And then Yael takes her hammer and hammers Sisera. So there's two hammers going on here, right? One is the hammering of the hooves of Sisera's horses that are going into battle, but then Sisera is the one who is hammered into the ground at the end of the battle. Next, notice that Yael is quite literally sandwiched between the word blessed in verse 24, which interestingly is the Hebrew word Barak, and that sounds exactly like Barak's name. Yael is the one who took the glory away from Barak. Remember, Deborah said that a woman would get the glory of the battle, right? So it's interesting that the Hebrew word blessed, which sounds exactly like Barak's name, but it's just spelled differently here, sandwiches Yael, and she is almost like stealing his blessing a little bit, maybe. So Yael is blessed, and she's called blessed first above all woman, and then all woman intense, right? So not only is she kind of like stealing Barak's blessing, so to speak, she's blessed above all the women, right? And this is a very surprising outcome because she's from the line of Cain, and somehow this woman who should be the seed of the snake turns out to be the seed of the woman and is the most blessed in this story. I should note here that curdled milk, like I mentioned earlier, is actually warmed up creamy milk. So it seems kind of gross at first in this poem for Yael to give Sisera some curdled milk instead of water. Like, that would be, you ask for some water, and then you get some lukewarm curdled milk. This actually would have been more akin to Yael giving Sisera a warm glass of creamy milk, right? This is not 2% milk. This is whole milk. Again, Yael is taking care of Sisera like a mother does her infant child. He asks for water. She gives him a glass of warm milk, tucks him in, maybe sings him a lullaby, then takes out the tent peg and hammers Sisera to death. Okay, so that's pretty grisly, but this poem isn't over. There's still one more act left. That gives us a window into the aftermath of the battle, actually. Through the window she looked out and wailed, Sisera's mother through the lattice, "Where are his riders? Why are they taking so long? Why do the steps of his chariots delay?" Her wisest princesses would tell her. Indeed, she repeats these words to herself. Are they not gleaning? Are they not gathering? Are they not dividing up the spoils, a concubine or two for every warrior? To Sisera, a spoil of dyed cloth that's embroidered. Yes, a dyed cloth of fine embroidery from the necks of the prey. May all your enemies perish in this way, Yahweh. But may those who love you be like the rising of the sun in all its might. And the land was at rest for 40 years. 40 years. So this is actually my favorite part of the whole song. This is like an ancient Yo Mama joke. Now the singers turn their attention to, of all people, Sisera's mom. Right after they finish talking about Yael, the authors say, through the window she looked out. And for a second, you as the reader are thinking that Yael is looking out of her tent to greet Barak, right? And show him the military general that she just vanquished, because in the story, that's what she does. She walks out of a tent and she's like, hey, look what I did, right? Instead, cleverly, the next line tells you it wasn't Yael, one mother, it was the other mother. It was Sisera's mother looking out of the window. And she's not looking out to tell her people that she won the war, but rather she is looking out of a window waiting to see the outcome of the war. Then Sisera's mom goes through this whole bout of anxious worrying, and her companions try to reason with her as any good friends would. They make up a reason for her son not coming home in the time that she, in her worrying and anxiety, chooses to believe. right? They tell up a made up fable, and she believes it. Her friends tell her that Sisera is late because he's gathering up so much plunder from the battle. They go on about the decadent, expensive clothes, how each warrior has an enslaved concubine or even two, how they have embroidered clothes from the necks of all their prey. Notice how in all of this scene is making fun at the worrying and delusional stories of grandeur of Sisera's mom that she's telling herself to ease her anxiety about her son, but it's also subtly giving us like a window into the grotesque nature of ancient warfare, the plundering of clothes from dead bodies, the enslavement of women as concubines, is supposedly a glorious thing for Sisera to do and a noble reason for him to be late in coming home. The scene then both shows us the anxiety of a family member who ruminates about their deceased loved one, and also it doesn't shy away from the evil that Sisera participated in and that he was most likely doing to Israel at this time. And it's really fitting that this scene doesn't end. It just stops in the middle of the rumination of Sisera's mom. The companions of Sisera's mom are telling her this whole inventive tale of military victory, and the poet turns around and just says, "May all your enemies perish in this way, Yahweh." You get it? This scene ends with Sisera's mom consistently worrying about her son that she doesn't know has already passed away. This state of worrying and waiting for the bad news for the news, good or bad, of a loved one, that is the fate of Yahweh's enemies. Gotta say, that's pretty harsh. It's pretty terrible. You know? I also love how this poem ends with a contrast between the righteous and the wicked. The wicked will perish like Sisera and his family, but those who love Yahweh will be like the rising sun. This is a fitting image because the sunrise is something that is consistent and reliable, and is something you can count on happening every single morning. So that reliability of the sunset is contrasted starkly with the perpetual state of ignorance and darkness that Sisera's mother is left in at the end of this poem. Oh, that was a lot. That is the story and the song of Deborah and Barak, of the queen bee and lightning. For me, this is such a fun, faith-building story, and I think that while the story does talk about women and roles of leadership, the primary focus of the story is on the tension between the seed of the woman and the seed of the snake. Here, again, I don't think that the story is actually about women's roles in ancient Near Eastern society. Rather, it's about identity, shame, and the surprising, unexpected redemption that God can bring about for the most far-gone and irretrievable of people. Oh, such a powerful story. And now I'd like to end with a poem that I've written that is based off of the song of Deborah and Barak. This may sound a bit corny to some of y'all, but I thought it was worth sharing anyways. All I've really done here is take the song in most people's Bibles, most of the translations, and I've tried to make it rhyme and give it more of a poetic feel. So I took a couple of different translations and tried to add and take away a few words to give this more of like a poetic rhyming feel to it. So I hope you enjoy. On a bright and sunny day, Deborah and Barak sang, the queen bee and lightning, together their voices rang. When the princes of Israel took the lead, when the people answered the call and took heed, "Oh, bless Yahweh," they sing, to his name praises they bring. Hear, O kings, give ear, O chiefs, the son of Yahweh is near. Come, let's sing of the time he came out from Seir, of the time he marched out from Edom, from Red, when he took up arms, from all our enemies fled. The land quaked, the heavens dripped, and the earth shook. Mountains melted before Yahweh at his very look. Before Adonai, God of Israel, the Holy One of Sinai. And the days of Shamgar and Yael, all the paths ceased, all the paths fell. Travelers trod in twisting trails, avoiding every road and every well. The unwalled cities ceased, they say, until Deborah, the mother of Israel, arose on that fateful day. New gods they sought, and thus to their gates war was brought. Amidst 40,000 in Israel, not a spear or shield could be caught. My heart goes out to the princes of Israel who took the lead. The call of the people, oh, the call of the people, they did heed. You who ride on donkeys white, on regal clouds taking flight, shout out, O wayfarers, make it known. By the watering holes, tell how Yahweh's deeds had shown. Tell of how he saved our villages and towns, of how his compassion for us did abound. Awake, awake, O Deborah, bring a song to Yahweh's throne. Arise, Barak, lead your captive son of Abinoam. The nobles came, Yahweh's people in warriors' gown, from Ephraim to Zebulun. Their fame was renowned. But among Reuben's divisions, wide as the sea, great were their hearts' rulings, and from the war did they flee. Why do you sit among the sheepfolds, listening to the shepherd's tune, when the battle calls for bravery at high noon? Among Reuben's divisions, wide as the sea, great were the heart's rulings, and from the war did they flee. Gilead dwelled far across the Jordan River, but really, when he heard the war, his heart did quiver. And Dan, why do you linger by the ships? Because from the battle, you were ready to slip. And Asher sold seashells by the seashore. He got a tan, but closed his ears to war. In the fields of battle, their presence was rare, their absence was noted, their courage scant to bear. But Zebulun challenged the grim reaper. He marched even when things got all the bleaker. And Naphtali was on the front lines. Even in the heat of battle, he didn't pine. The horses' hooves hammered, a rhythm in the night. Against Sisera and his horde, the stars continued their fight. The Kishon's torrent swept away all those who came, every soldier who marched under King Yabin's name. Curse Meroz, cried Yahweh's angel, ringing clear and stark, for in this heavenly battle they left no mark. But Yael will be blessed among all women, for she changed Heber's line. A seed of Cain she was, yet she chose to be a child of the divine. He pleaded for water, she gave him milk. He asked for a cotton blanket, she gave him some silk. In her hospitality, her deception was unseen. In a splendid bowl, she brought him some nice, warm cream. Then her hand ventured for the tent peg. Her courage held tight. Her right hand claimed the workman's hammer, and she readied for the fight. She struck down Sisera. His head met her wrath. She shattered and pierced his temple, defining her chosen path. Between her feet, he knelt. He fell. In the dust he lay spread. In the realm of the living he knelt. But into Sheol he fell, birthed to the land of the dead. Through the window she gazes, with a frog in her throat. Sisera's mother appears through the lattice with false hope afloat. Why are his riders delayed? Where are the hooves' rhythmic song? Why does his chariot? What could possibly be wrong? Her wise companions console her, repeating soothing tales. He's surely gathering spoils while the victory prevails. A maiden or two for each warrior, dyed cloth to adorn, each piece embroidered richly, from the vanquished it's torn. Yes, spoils from the necks of the fallen, trophies of the fray. He's delayed because of the plunder. Don't worry, he'll be home by the end of the day. So may all of your foes meet their end in this way, Adonai. May those who love you rise like the sun in the morning sky. Thanks for listening, guys. I'll see y'all next time.